Mr. Hoyer in just a second, but before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Mr. Hoyer will call on participants in order. We ask that all participants please mute themselves when they are not speaking. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can raise your hand or type a message in the chat box. For everyone's awareness, this event is streaming live on Facebook and is open to the press. Mr. Hoyer, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. That's Maya Valentine of my office. Thank you very much, Maya. And thank all of you for joining me and us together to discuss the rental assistance and the mortgage assistance programs that we have in place. As you know, on July 31st of this year, we hit what we think is a crisis wall. And that was the vulnerability of millions of people, literally millions of people, of being evicted from their homes. That was a crisis that during the pandemic, and particularly with the variant spiking very greatly, we thought was inimical to health and also quite obviously inimical to families who would be put out on the street and lose all their belongings probably. So we urge the president, when I say we, the leadership in the House, the 4 elected leaders, urge the president to continue the emergency moratorium on evictions. There is a question, as I think all of you know, as to whether or not the Supreme Court would indicate that either CDC or the president had that authority. Ultimately, Ms. Walensky, the administrator of the CDC director, did in fact issue a more limited, although covering about 90% of the previously covered cohort, about 90% were subject to the moratorium on a continuing basis. So that's where we are. Now, what has happened is the members of Congress have come home. As you know, we in previous year and this year combined, we did 25 billion in the December 20 omnibus appropriation bill, and 25 billion. And then we did another $21.55 billion in the American Rescue Plan, making a total of $46.5 billion. We also provided almost $10 billion for states and local governments to provide assistance to our most vulnerable homeowners, obviously dealing with mortgage deficiencies and failure to pay on mortgages. Having done that, we were disappointed, and I don't think we're casting aspersions on anybody, but we were very disappointed in July when we looked at this crisis that was upon us, to learn that about 3 to 4 billion max of the $46 billion, give or take, that had been appropriated, 46 and a half, less than 4 billion of that had been actually given to people who were either landlords or tenants to take care of the rent obligation that tenants had to landlords. Obviously, there's a great concern about tenants, but there's also a very great concern about landlords, particularly small landlords who have maybe 1, 2, 3 homes, units, whatever that they rent out, and are relying on that for their income to live on, and relying on that to service whatever debt that they had on their own mortgages. So I wanted to get all of you together today to sort of educate me, number one, and number two, to discuss how we can get that money out most effectively and quickly for landlords and tenants, so that this continuing anxiety of putting people out on the street can be allayed. I understand that it's a relatively new, it's not a relatively new program. There was not necessarily the mechanism in place to identify tenants who applied, tenants who qualified or landlords who qualified. And also that the process itself, according to the chair of the Finance Committee, Maxine Waters, she believed was for the most part, pretty complex and difficult to maneuver. And from a landlord's perspective, if they did not have the agreement and cooperation of the tenant, they could not make application. So there were a number of problems that confronted us that I want to talk about today. I'm interested in hearing how the executive branch, nonprofit operators, and courts are working together to get the word out about relief. My staff has given me an excellent memo, and clearly the two programs are not necessarily related with one another. So we have to see, when I say that the two programs, the relief program, not necessarily related to the money in some respects. That's not exactly how I want to say it. Jazz, give me, what am I saying? The two programs.
The eviction moratorium that's in place is not directly associated with the emergency relief money.
Right. Well, of course, I said it right. The point being that it was not obviously it was an emergency program adopted, and pretty much the specifics were left up to the states and to the local governments as to how to implement it, which made it tough and made it therefore not necessarily uniform. In any event, as each of you are speaking, and again, I thank each of you for what you're doing. I like to say, we members of Congress, we talk a lot, we write a bill, and then we think we solved the problem. That obviously is not true at all. What is true is we've given you dollars and some outline of what our objectives are, but then it's up to you who are on the front line, who are dealing with the programs at the local level. In our state, relatively simple in that we have, as all of you know, 23 counties and Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. Some states obviously have very much smaller and very many more jurisdictions. So I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but my understanding is the big counties got money to administer on their own, and relatively speaking, the small counties have it going through the state program, and you'll speak of that. But I want to know how much money and home assistance fund monies has been dispersed in your area, and how many people have applied, and what strategies you're using to inform the public. Clearly, members of Congress were frustrated and not angry at any of you, but just frustrated that we had put all this money on the table and so little of it had been spent, and an emergency on evictions was confronting us. So you might want to address that. Okay, that's my spiel. And let me now recognize Stuart Campbell, who's the director of the program with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Stuart, I guess you're the sort of the top housing guy in our state. So tell me what you're going to do to make this all good.
Well, thank you, Leader Hoyer. I appreciate you inviting me, and I want to commend your staff, and to me, he's Delegate Lewis, for pulling this together. And I don't want to tell Secretary Holt that I got a promotion, because I'm really not the top housing guy, but I am responsible for the ERAP program within the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. So let me share my screen, and forgive me if I don't get this right the first time, but need to bring up the.
Stuart, I will certainly forgive you, because my competency is, I'm sure, less than yours.
All right, so
who are we sharing with?
Me. So I'm just trying to bring up my slides, and okay, it should be coming up now. Let me know if you can see them.
Yeah, got it.
All right, so actually you might, there we go. All right. So thank you again for inviting me. I do want to give sort of an update on the ERAP program, the Maryland Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It is, as you mentioned, a program that was
Stuart, can I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
We're talking now about the two tranches of money that the state got.
Correct.
one about 400 and one about 300, so or 700 plus.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So there's actually even more than that. And that's something a point I want to make first off is that the ERAP program is actually one of a series of rental assistance programs that Congress has appropriated through the CARES Act and some other pieces of legislation. So we actually, before we even received ERAP funding, we made over $113 million available to local jurisdictions. And we had through June about 90 of that already spent. We expect through July it's going to go up to 95, but the reason it sort of stopped being spent was because we did get the ERAP funds. And I'm going to kind of break this down a little bit more in a minute, but we as in Maryland received 143 million directly to the 8 largest jurisdictions. And I'm sure you can imagine which ones those are: Baltimore City, the county, Baltimore County, Prince George's, Montgomery, Anne Arundel, et cetera. And then the state received 233 million in funding. So that total over the last year, we've received 489 million in funding. And that doesn't even include ERAP 2, which is the second tranche that you were referring to. So we have received and we have been putting out a significant amount of funding to serve and help people who are experiencing the threat of eviction. And that is
Stuart, am I correct? Excuse me for interrupting. Am I correct? So we've, of the 489, am I correct? The 120, we've done about 25%.
So 25% of the overall total, but yes, because of, but I have some even more updated numbers that I can share in a minute, but yes, but that was through June. As you mentioned, ERAP 1, ERAP 1 and 2, there are 2 tranches. The 401 million that was appropriated through the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and then ERAP 2, which is the 352 million that was through the American Rescue Plan. And again, they did sort of a similar breakdown. The 8 largest counties got 148 million, and then the state is has received 204 million. So general requirements, these can be used for rental and utility costs incurred by tenants after March 13th, 2020. The tenant must be at or below 80% of the area median income. There is a priority focus on those who are at or below 50% of the area median income. And then the tenant also must be impacted by COVID, which is something that they can actually self-attest to. So they can just state that they've been financially impacted by COVID, and that will be enough to satisfy at least from our perspective, the application. So here's the breakdown of ERAP 1, and I'm going to be talking primarily about ERAP 1 because we have not yet made final decisions on ERAP 2. This is how the allocation was appropriated and made to all of the counties. The first column was the funding that we received, the 258 million that we received directly. The next column was the 143 million that went to the 8 largest jurisdictions that I mentioned a minute ago. And then, of course, the third column is the total. And so the final column is the breakdown of the percentage of where the money went. The federal funds,
Stuart, if I'm reading that correctly, about 50% went to the largest jurisdictions, and the other 50% the state was administering.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that 82% of renters are in those 8 largest jurisdictions. So when the Treasury allocated the funds, they only looked at population. When we allocated our portion of it, we also considered the amount of renters that were in each jurisdiction. So that's why it's not quite matching up, the 82% with 82, because we could only do that to our portion of the funds. Treasury had already given out 143 million. But we also felt that we needed to send the money where it was most needed, which is why we included the number of renters in each jurisdiction as a factor. We've done a ton of marketing. We've had over 9 million online views. We've had 5,400 TV and radio commercials, 570,000 direct mail postcards have been sent. We're really seeing a lot of folks viewing these on our websites and on the YouTube video, Facebook ads, all of that. We know that our call center that we've set up has served over 17,000 households. And the page views and new views and things that I don't really understand, but have been told are very important, is that the average time on the page is about 4 minutes, which means people are actually going to the pages and spending some time there. Here's some other culturally specific outreach that we've done. We've had 96,000, almost 97,000 ERAP collateral distributed. That's primarily through canvassing, going door to door, and also at events and things that we've been a part of calling together. We've had a significant African-American outreach and Hispanic market outreach, as you can see in the two lines below. So this is where we are to date. This is the latest information. We are required to report to the Treasury on the 15th of every month, so the timing is perfect. We just submitted our latest report a few days ago. We know that collectively over 27,000 applications have been received. A total of 9,600 households have been assisted. The total financial assistance distributed is, and this is just ERAP, is about $59 million. And then the payments that are in progress, which is also something that we're required to have reported to us, is almost 34 million. So we're talking about almost $100 million of the 400 million that we received has been distributed. I think what's really important to note is that on the bar graphs on the right, you will see that the assistance distributed by month has really shot up. This is cumulative, but you'll see how the amount of funding is doubling and in some cases tripling from the previous months.
Stuart, let me understand what you just said.
Sure.
When you say it's cumulative, the 28 million represents July payments?
Yes, I'm sorry. Right. July payments in July, July, 15 million. Right. So right. I think what you said, Leader Hoyer, a few minutes ago at the beginning, when you indicated that this is really a somewhat complex program and there wasn't any infrastructure in place prior to this, that really is the case. And so it took us some time to pull things together, to create an infrastructure, to identify our partners, and to get the mechanisms in place to get the money out. However, once that happened, as you see, in May is when we were able to say every single jurisdiction in Maryland was open and receiving applications. Once that happened, you've seen that the number of the amount of financial assistance going out the door has almost tripled. So we are very confident, and actually, we're not by any means resting on our laurels, but we're very pleased to see how much funding is actually starting to go out the door, and we fully anticipate meeting any deadlines that the Treasury has. And the last slide I wanted to leave is for you and for anyone watching, that if they are interested in applying or need to apply, these are the two places to start. The rentrelief.maryland.gov is the website, and there they'll find not only links to all 24 jurisdictions on how to apply, but they'll also find some information related to legal assistance and the court process. Or they can simply call the number below, 877-546-5595, and they'll be connected to that call center that I mentioned before. So-
Stuart, let me ask you something.
Yes.
How do we, there are a number of criteria you have to meet in terms of income, in terms of COVID related and things of that nature. If I'm a renter and I can't pay my rent and I come to you and I assert that I qualify, do we have to take additional action to confirm that, or do we accept the representation of the renter?
So there are two pieces of eligibility. One is income and
Right.
one is impact, right, from COVID. Both of those can be self-attested. The first one, the income, Treasury, one of the challenges is Treasury has not been as clear as we would have liked on their guidance. But they have now started to say that if the caseworker, let's say, says, please provide income documentation, and if the tenant says, I don't have it, then they can next go to self-attestation. So once the tenant says that they do not have the ability to verify income, then self-attestation should be accepted. And then for the second criteria, which is hardship, we've always been encouraging that the local jurisdictions accept self-attestation for hardship, because it could mean anything, any number of ways that someone could be impacted. So it's really difficult to characterize and categorize things. So self-attestation for financial hardship due to COVID is completely accepted.
Stuart, I'm going to ask you, but I want the other county folks to respond to this as well. Have we dealt with landlords who had trouble getting the tenant to cooperate in making application for the money? The Congress is really worried about, obviously, tenants, but also landlords that are small landlords that have 1 or 2 or 3 units
Right.
they're renting out and relying on that for income and the payment of their bills as well.
So one of the challenges is that it is actually in the statute that the tenant must be involved.
Yeah.
Now, the statute doesn't say the landlord has to be involved. So in fact, a tenant can receive direct funding.
Right.
So if the tenant comes and says, my landlord won't work with me, and the caseworker tries to reach out to the landlord and they weren't responsive, the tenant can receive the funding, the assistance directly. However, that is not the case in reverse. And unfortunately, our hands are tied. We have done everything we can to provide outreach to landlords. We've worked with landlord associations. The secretary sent out a letter just last week to basically every landlord that we could reach, encouraging them to participate. But if there is a case or a situation where a landlord absolutely doesn't participate, then, if a tenant absolutely doesn't participate, then there's really nothing we can do.
You think, I'm not saying that I'm suggesting this, but there may be, I don't know whether anybody's talked about this at the state or local level, but a requirement that the landlord, that the tenant does in fact cooperate at risk of losing their eligibility.
Yeah, so it really is just a signature. That's all we need. We just need the tenant to sign, and they would lose. You're right. They would lose their eligibility because they're not participating. You actually have to participate, but unfortunately, that just doesn't help the landlord in these cases. And it is, it's something that could be worth a look at for a fix, but at least right now, we really have to have the tenant involved.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing from each of you as you go through your explanations, because it seems to me, small landlord, now obviously there are 5 exceptions that you can evict people for. And then the court, I guess, would have to make a determination as to whether or not those 5 exceptions apply in any instance. But I mean, it seems to me that because we're concerned about both tenant and landlord, The very big organizations probably can make it happen because they have the personnel to get the tenant to participate, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd be interested in your observations of, are you dealing with landlords who are having this problem, and what, if any, things do we do? I presume the first thing obviously is to contact the tenant and say, hey, sign up. Anyway, comment on that when it's your turn. Stuart, go ahead.
Oh, well, I certainly agree. And I really would like to hear how the locals are handling this.
Right.
We host a monthly meeting with all of the roundtable of all of the jurisdictions to talk about how they're handling particular issues and things like that. They're the ones on the ground. They're the ones that really see what's happening, and I would love to hear how they're working with this issue.
Okay, great. All right, let's go to Jazz. Help me with Aspasia. Is that right?
Aspasia.
Aspia. Okay.
Aspasia.
Can I call you AX?
Sure.
I'm going to call you AX. You've got tongue twisters in both ends.
Yes. And thank you for this opportunity. I can start first by your last question, because we do see that. We do see some tenants who are not collaborating. Some of them are afraid that they're going to be evicted. So some of them are vacating the unit overnight. And this is because they don't know enough about the program, or some of them think, and we had a discussion about that today actually, some of them think that the information the landlord is asking them is so it can be used to take them to court.
Right.
And yes, I don't want to forget to introduce myself. Aspasia Xipolia, I'm the director of DHED in Prince George's County. Mm-hmm. So that does exist. And what we have tried to do is work with our nonprofit partners, because a lot of the tenants also may be dealing with other issues, right? They're worried about someone tracking down their immigration status or other things. And there is that fear of government there, like, why do you need all these details? And so we are working through all of these things with trusted nonprofit partners who have done great work in the county for years, and they have this trust relationship with the tenants on the ground. Today, we heard a great story about one of those tenants who was hesitating to work with a landlord, and then ended up working through one of the nonprofit organizations, HIP, and everything worked out at the end. But this is heavy lifting. It is a lot of work, and it does have to do with that level of mistrust that exists sometimes. And it wasn't born today. It has been around forever. So we just need to acknowledge it. I'm sorry. You want to ask?
Can I ask you something on that? Because it occurs to me that when we provided for payments could be made to landlords, I don't know how many of you are paying landlords directly, presumably with the cooperation of the tenant.
Yes.
But in the case that you sort of outline, where somebody leaves in the dead of night and you don't know where they are, obviously the intent of the statute and the money being appropriated for tenants and landlords was to try to make both whole. And in that instance, the landlord obviously can't get the
correct
tenant. So am I correct that the landlord has no relief at that point in time?
Correct. There is no relief at that point. That's why we are trying to work with the tenants early on, because it's a win-win. One of the things
Sure.
This needs in my opinion, there are a couple of things, right? This needs a massive campaign from everybody between tenants and landlords to explain this is a win-win. And working in the local government, this is the first time we can say, in ages that the federal government has stepped in with so much money. So we need to be sort of like, this is a moment in time that I don't take it for granted. It's like unbelievable that we have the resources. What we need is to get the message out there at all fronts that this is a win-win-win relationship. You landlord need to work with your tenant, because that's how you're going to pay back your debt. And you tenant need to work with your landlord, because that's how you're not going to lose your home and you're not going to have delinquencies. And I think that level of messaging at a higher level, not just at the department level, So some of the things that for us have been very helpful is because each department around the country, there is so much we can do. We are just one department. Even if we work around the clock, which we do, like there are 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and that's it. And what we did very early on, I went up to my boss back in February, and we cannot do this alone. This is too big, right? It was very much what happened during COVID, where people were in their hospitals dying, and the doctors were doing everything they could. But it was really when everybody stepped up and started wearing masks and starts socially distancing that society sort of recalibrated. What we're going through right now is the aftermath of that. And for me, the lessons learned is we can't do this alone. And so there has to be a whole activation of government and parties. For us, the things that have worked so far, and we too struggle. We have helped a lot of people, but we have so many more people that are now in the queue. But my advice would be, we need everybody to be on the same page on that, not just at the county level, state and federal, both on the messaging. So on our county level, our CAO pulled together the chief judge and the sheriff and our department and said, okay, what can we do? This is the legislation. We're not legislators. We're working under this framework, but what can we do? And so one of the things we started doing is, when the sheriff gets the list of people who are late on payment and goes around and posts these notices, now posts a little symbol, which is our sticker with program information. So we try to build synergies at all levels, considering how we do operate under an imperfect set of circumstances. And I would say we need more time. I think it is wonderful. The October 3rd is wonderful, but it is not enough. And the reality of the matter is that people continue to not be able to pay rent. And so I think other states that have their own moratoriums extended find themselves in a better position than we are. We're still going to continue working around the clock and trying to solve all of those cases, but we really need more time because now with the new Delta variant, we see people continue to struggle.
Well, let's hope October 3rd holds. There are court cases, as you know, that are pursuing, and the court sort of the Supreme Court gave indication that they would not approve an additional extension absent action by Congress. Unfortunately, we couldn't take action. In neither house did we have a majority, and one of the reasons is because we extended, I guess, 4 or 5 times. I think we legislatively extended it 3 times, and then a couple of times CDC extended it. So I mean, there's a feeling at some point in time this has to come to an end. Of course, we now have this COVID spike, this variant. Let me ask you something. How far back do you go? I'm a tenant. I cooperate with the landlord. I haven't paid rent for the last 3-4 months. We provided for retroactive and prospective payments, did we not?
You did. So what we are doing—
How far back will you go?
April 1st, 2020. And
okay.
We can go up to 18 months now that we also have ERA 2 money.
Okay, so yeah, the CARES Act essentially was the criteria from when we went back to. So you could go back essentially 16 months?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we are trying to leverage.
Okay. And do you do prospective payments? In other words, pay a couple of months, 3 months, 4 months ahead?
So to date, we haven't done in Prince George's County because we have so many people who need our help. Right. But we are looking at our numbers and we are making a decision that moving forward, and we're going to start implementing that soon. We are going to go and provide also prospective rent up to 3 months, assuming we don't go over the 18 months for those that are 50% and below, not for everybody. We are prioritizing.
Okay, we're talking about 80% and 50% of the benchmarks, right? Yeah.
Correct.
All right. Okay, thank you. Diane Hayslip. Diane, are you on?
Mr. Hoyer, I think Diane's internet went out. So the next person would be Amber.
Okay, Amber. Nastico.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm a staff attorney with the Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland, and we run a day of in-court clinics in the city in rent court. So I can't speak to the numbers and all that, but I can speak to what happens, in the thick of things on the ground. In terms, it's funny because we see the majority of the applicants or that we're helping to avoid eviction are renters. They want to apply for the rental assistance. Sometimes it's getting the landlords involved that we have trouble. From my perspective, in court that day is a
Amber,
great
can I stop you there?
Sure.
Why in heaven's name are the landlords who are going to get the money unwilling to participate? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, at this point, it's frustration. I think some landlords now this is speaking before the CDC order was extended. So we didn't kind of have that extra time and protection. But on my point, I've seen a lot of frustration where they will just be like, nope, we're done. We don't even want the money anymore. We're just going to wait for a new renter. And they want to proceed with the eviction because they've been waiting, for months to get the rental assistance to come in. So oftentimes that will happen. In terms of payment, I've seen, I have some cases now where people have applied in May and we're waiting. We're so close to payment. We're almost on the last step, but sometimes it comes down to how savvy people are with the internet and with this portal we have in the city and, uploading documents, and tenants upload documents and landlords need to upload documents, and we're kind of waiting and going back and forth. So that takes time for the payment to go through. So, and then I've seen other ones where they've worked really well together and the payments have come within 2-3 months. So that's kind of an issue also. I've also seen clients who are—
Amber, I apologize. When you say that payments come within 2 or 3 months, is that once the paperwork is approved, it takes 2 or 3 months to make a payment, or are you talking about the cumulative time from application to payment?
Application to payment. Those would be fast. From what I've seen, 2 to 3 months would be on the fast side of it. We have asked through our contacts, sometimes if eviction was pending, we could fast track it. And we were told those applications could maybe be done within 30 to 45 days. But I have not seen that happen. That's very fast. We were kind of saved again with the CDC extension. So we have more time. So we're not asking for these expedited cases as much. But we were told by the Baltimore office—
Amber, can I stop you? And I see Antonio, I wasn't sure whether you were shaking your head or not. Maybe not, but it seems to me that's pretty slow. It's pretty slow, not so much for the tenant who has an eviction moratorium, so they're relatively confident that they will stay in their home. But for the landlord, presumably, we didn't make any moratorium on their paying their bills.
Right.
So if they have a lack of, again, we're not talking about the big people here, the very large real estate renters. But what we're talking about is, I guess, I don't know how it breaks down. Obviously, it's less people with the small landlords, but there are probably a lot more small landlords than there are big landlords. So if it takes that long to get a payment, the whole system starts to back up. The landlord can't pay their bills, presumably. Then they're facing some sort of action by their creditor.
Yes, and that's where we see the frustration come in, where sometimes they just want to, try with the next renter. So it does take some time, and it comes down to different things. Like I said, uploading documents, getting the proper documents, filling out the portal. We have this neighborly portal that the city uses, and making sure everything's uploaded, and then it gets sent. I believe, I don't know all the details, but it gets sent to a reviewer, then a certifier, then a fiscal person, and then so it kind of goes through these stages. And like with the case I have right now, I'm trying to track down the landlord just so he can send in a canceled check so we can get that payment, because the case is back in court in 2 weeks. Now, again, we're covered by the CDC, but if that was not extended, we would be facing that eviction come, in 2 weeks.
Let me stop you on that. I apologize, because Jazz Lewis and I have talked about this. So there is a pending eviction case?
So in failure to pay rent, they'll get the judgment. Sometimes, if we can work out with the landlords, we'll ask for postponements and we'll just keep trying to postpone to buy time for this rental assistance to come in.
Okay, the reason I ask you that, Jazz, I thought under the statute, they cannot file a case. That is an action that is there's a moratorium on filing evictions as well as getting judgment on eviction. Is that accurate or not? Maybe
They can file it, as my understanding, they can file it, but there's no process beyond the filing, if I'm correct.
AX, is that right?
Almost. So my understanding is they can still file. And prior to this new CDC moratorium, some cases were heard. And even if they were heard, at least in the county, and even if they were heard on the case of non-payment, a judgment was made, but they were put aside, so they were not executed.
Right.
So
The reason I ask this, because I've discussed with my idea is, assuming you get to court, because finding people and knowing who they are, when they get to court, you know who the landlord is, you know who the tenant is. And presumably the landlord and the tenant can then be identified and contacted, and you, AX, or another fiscal authority can indicate, we have dollars and we have made a determination that X renter qualifies. And we are prepared to pay, therefore, the landlord the sum due and owing up to, as you said, if it's April 16 months back rent, if in fact the renter qualifies.
we do that, yes, and we have a lot of success with that. So we're working with the Community Legal Services of Prince George's County,
Right.
and so they're there with our. So we have been doing that, yes.
Right. Yeah, that's
And
what I suggested, and that seems to me to make a lot of sense, because then, in fact, you don't have to get judgment, because in fact the debt is satisfied, and maybe even satisfied prospectively. I don't know how you do that, but nevertheless, Amber, my point is, at the court site, you bring the parties together. You don't have to go out and look for them, and assuming the tenant shows up. Now, the tenant may not show up, and the landlord probably is represented by, an attorney. So it seems to me there's still, Jazz, some opportunity to involve the situs of the eviction proceedings as a place where you could settle, because you've got somebody there who has the money. That is, the housing people they have the money. You have the landlord who's seeking eviction, and you have a tenant whose defense is, I can't pay because of COVID, and the housing people come in and say, okay, we've interviewed you, you filled out the documents. We think, again, it may be a self-assertion on a lot of these, and frankly, when you have a program like this, there's going to be fraud. Human beings being what they are, there's going to be fraud, and we're going to spend some money that we ought not to spend. But I think, my own view, it's probably, you're talking about 10, 15%, hopefully max. And the majority of the money will go to tenants who really need it to not be evicted, and landlords who deserve it. I mean, they have a property interest, which we are in effect by the eviction moratorium compromising without due process of law, unless you. And I don't think that the legislative action does not count as due process.
And we were actually advocating for that. And they just started doing it to have an office in the district court for rental assistance, because like you said, Congressman, it's a great opportunity. And for us, we have a lot of leverage and negotiating power. We can say to the landlord, here's rental assistance. This is where the tenant is in the process of application. We're here. It's going to come through within the next, month or so. This is how much, giving a specific amount that will be, paid to you as a landlord. And we've found success having those details to then have the landlord agree to a postponement or to stay the eviction. This was before the CDC extension, but to stay the eviction and kind of negotiate. So having someone there from rental assistance is a great opportunity to kind of get this done. And then also it gives us negotiating power as nonprofits to compromise and do these postponements and avoid these judgments and evictions.
Well, Amber,
Mr. Hoyer, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say there's about 10 minutes left, and a remind that we might want to open up to some of the smaller counties as well.
We do want to do that, and thank you for Maya for reminding me. But I think the eviction moratorium is going to end at some point in time. I don't think the votes in the Congress to continue it. I don't think the court's going to sustain it. So I think it's going to end, which means that it is critically important that this almost $50 billion or over 50 billion, I count the nine for the mortgage. It is very critically important that we get a stream of this money flowing so that we avoid the evictions that we're trying to avoid of poor people, essentially, who are very vulnerable to this virus, being put out in the street and have no place to live, and their kids have no home address. We're all very, very concerned about that, and we're concerned about landlords. So it seems to me, Jazz, we ought to be looking towards that, and AX and all the rest of you who are on this phone, to look at how we can do it. And you'd say it takes a month or 2 months, assuming when the eviction notice is filed, the tenant is identified as in arrears, and you said the notices were being put out in the notices you send, how they can alleviate this obligation, something like that, so that by the time the court is ready to hear the case, the housing authority has, in effect, pre-approved the tenant and can write a check that day, not 30 days later, but that day to the landlord. And maybe if the tenant wants to say, I don't owe this, that's another thing. And, that's obviously that has to be litigated then. But if the tenant says, yes, I haven't paid for 4 months, and the landlord agrees, yes, they're in 4 months in arrears, seems to me that day, the housing authority, with the millions of dollars it has in its pocket, can write that check. Just for thought. Okay, let's go to, who do we go to next, Maya? We can go to Dina Barkley. Dina, are you on with Charles County?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Thank
Dina.
you. So representing Charles County Department of Community Services, the way we've structured our program is a public-private partnership. So our housing authority here in county government is contracted out with 4 different nonprofit organizations. Much to what you were saying, Leader Hoyer, we have a strong partnership with our Southern Maryland Legal Aid Bureau, and they have boots on the ground in the courthouse, ready to assist clients who maybe didn't hear about our program somehow. We've been doing a lot of outreach, in many, many different ways. So we're trying to reach people informally as well as, in the normal processes with social media and newspaper articles and things like that. We've got a lot of our nonprofit partners do street ministry. They're reaching out in communities. We've got the faith community involved in referring people. So we're really trying to find people where they are and make sure they have the information, which is key. But then also for anybody who slips through the cracks somehow, we've got boots on the ground in the courthouse ready to help. We have not seen, and again, my department isn't the boots on the ground part. We're administering the grant with our nonprofit partners. But I think a key in what Aspasia had mentioned, and I think you had mentioned too, Leader Hoyer, is having trusted entities who are delivering that news. So we're not seeing a lot of resistance from landlords. We're actually seeing great cooperation from the majority of our landlords. They want the money. They want to get, even with things,
Sure.
If they have a tenant that they didn't really like to begin with, maybe they're not so excited about it, but they still want to be made financially whole before they, move on to looking for a new tenant, maybe when that lease is up the next time or something. So we're not really seeing a whole lot of resistance on the part of the landlords. We're actually seeing quite a bit of cooperation. We did get started late. I do have to give a kudos to Stuart Campbell and his team at DHCD. We had a lot of startup issues and just getting documentation and paperwork so that we could actually really begin this program in earnest. But I am very happy to tell you that today, in about 30 days time, we've distributed 30% of our funds that we received to about 200 households. So when I looked at Stuart's slide there where they had about 9,700 in the state, for little Charles County to have done 200 already in 30 days, I'm pretty happy with our performance right now. And really that's in great respect to our nonprofit partners who have worked really hard to help us get this going and reaching out to the community. One of the things that we did,
Dina, can I ask you a question?
absolutely.
As I understand it, Aspasia has, or AX as I call her, has the money. She has the money. Does the state have the money and you, in effect, identify who they're to pay it to?
The state is granting us the funds to administer here locally, and we are paying our partners. So every time they send us a payment request. So yesterday I processed $700,000 worth of payments, which Mr. Campbell doesn't even know about yet. So you can add that to your total. Yesterday, $700,000 worth of payments to our nonprofit partners. We are funding them, they're paying the landlords. And so we're kind of all reimbursing each other. But the county is actually directly responsible for receiving the funds from the state, making sure that the participants are eligible, that the landlords are following through on their obligations to, you know, address the arrearages appropriately and make sure that the money gets sent to where it needs to go.
Dana, let me ask somewhat of a cynical question, which I presume Prince George's County doesn't have. I may be wrong. Presumably, when you're contracting out, you therefore have overhead that does not go to tenants or landlords, correct?
A small portion, yes.
What you got a ballpark figure of what?
So the maximum allowable on the grant for administrative expenses was 8%.
Oh, okay.
That was dictated by DHCD, and we've stayed under 8%.
Wonderful.
So and actually, you know, we'll have to see how things play out. We were unable to actually hire the staff that we were hoping would help us to administer these programs. So we may actually come in under that. And if once we kind of play this out a little bit longer, because we've only been doing it for about a month, we may be going back to Stewart's team and asking them if we can reallocate that to project services instead, because we know that's where the need is. And we were taking a minimal amount just to try to cover our own
project
expenses.
services? Is that tenant money and landlord?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Utilities, rent payments, all that. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Direct
Yeah.
services. Yeah.
Right.
So one of the things I did want to mention, I know I want to give other folks a chance to talk here. We had been administering two different community development block grants before we got ERAP money, which were also for eviction prevention rental assistance. And one of the ways, because we did get a late start compared to some jurisdictions, one of the ways that we were able to fill that gap is we were using our community development block grant money first while we waited for ERAP money to come in. So we have really not seen, you know, long delays in being able to provide services. And while we were administering our community block grant money, starting last year, we actually developed some very good working relationships with staff and judges at the courthouse. So they were helping us to early identify anybody who had a pending filing. Even when the moratoriums were in place, as others have said, the landlords were able to file those documents, they just weren't acted upon. We had a way to receive confidential referrals from the courthouse so that our nonprofits and our own government staff could reach out to landlords and tenants and let them know, hey, you don't have to do it this way. We can intervene and get you paid. And that way we were able to kind of keep those things from moving forward.
Yeah,
and that process has been very successful.
You know, it seems to me that's the most efficient way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we want to catch them early because by the time they get through, you know, court proceedings, they're all pretty frustrated, as Amber said. So we want to keep them from getting there if we can.
Well, and we're spending a lot of money on stuff that we can obviate. We can just get both parties whole in a sense for a while. That the one's not evicted and the other's getting the rent money they need to service their own bills and the mortgage on the rental property.
Absolutely.
Okay. Lanny Lancaster. Lanny? You with us?
I think we could also go to Jacqueline with Calvert County.
Okay, good.
Hey, this is Jacqueline Culver, and Lanny, feel free to interrupt me if you want to hop in.
I got the mic on if I could quickly. I'm not going to really say anything because in our county, Dennis Nicholson is our leader of the ERAP program. I'm a mere subcontractor of his, but he's doing a fantastic job, and I'll let him speak to it when he's called upon. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Okay.
Of course. In Calvert County, we have currently processed 70 applications for just over $500,000 in assistance. with more on the way, and that is direct financial assistance payments to landlords and utility companies. We have yet had to pay a client directly. We have been working directly with property managers and utility companies. One of the biggest challenges that we have here is me personally, and Stuart at DHCD knows, is getting the W-9s from the utility company so we can make payment. I know their staff has been helping me with over a month trying to get some W-9s for these companies so we can actually make payment, because they are not responsive to the request, so we can make payment through our system. Once applications come to my desk, I approve them within 3 days. So we are making payments weekly to landlords and utility companies. They first flow through Southern Maryland Tri-County Community Action, which is Michael Young, who I believe is on the call, as well as Lifestyles of Maryland. They are our administering agencies, which, as Dina mentioned, get some overhead funding. And we have spent overhead funding as well for advertisements to residents. So I did some data collection on our hardest hit areas and where we're having most applications come from. And what we did is we sent direct mailers to those areas. We also are doing a radio ad campaign and other targeted advertisements in media. We're doing social media posts, and next week I'm going live on Facebook to answer questions from the community and on YouTube. So we've been working directly with landlords, tenants. We have an online intake form that landlords and tenants can fill out, and then we refer them to the appropriate agency to help them with their requests and their needs. I think our biggest challenge is the ability of the average applicant to complete all their documentation, because it's overwhelming. There's a lot of reading and item collection needed. If you don't have a smartphone or a scanner, it's difficult. It's hard to do it all on your phone. So there is a lot of hand-holding and contact for that. Because imagine trying to fill out a 15-page application with kids running around trying to do virtual learning and homework. It's
Jacqueline,
not fun. Yeah.
Let me stop you at that. I would ask all the folks on the phone, Stuart, including yourself, or on the Zoom, if you have substantive suggestions on how to simplify the application process, because as I said, Maxine Waters, who chairs, as you know, you may know, the Financial Services Committee under which the housing program comes, she believes that a significant part of the problem and the slowness of the money going out the door. Again, as I say, we passed this money in December, and then in March, and so there was CARES Act money too, as you have back in March of 20. She believes that a substantial problem is the complexity of making an application, and that, you know, we're dealing with people who don't have real capacity in terms of experience. They may have the ability, but they don't have the experience of how to do this. I know myself, you know, I don't use the computer that much for, I have people that do that for me. So I'm very spoiled, but don't get educated well enough. And I imagine most of these people may not even have a computer, and many of them, if they have a computer, use it for very simple tasks. So I would like your input on that, all of you who are involved in this. How can we simplify the application form? How can we make that speedier? Amber, in particular, I think your organization may have some really good ideas about that.
Yeah,
okay,
we've been working one-on-one, and we have in-person staff members at both the administering agencies that can help. And I've helped coach people over the phone. I've actually hand-delivered applications with notes on them. But I think that would definitely help. And that's something that I'm concerned with more for any mortgage assistance coming, because looking at the average age of a homeowner in our area, it's someone who's not tech savvy is going to have physical copies of bills. They don't do online banking. We're talking about older adults. And so the more simple and straightforward it can be, the easier it will be for the average consumer. In our area, the renters are a little younger, and we're not a big renter population. So we haven't had as much of those pain points, but when we do have them, it is a lot of assistance is needed. And then we also, we work a little bit different than Charles, where the county is a pass-through agency, but the county is fronting all the costs and seeking reimbursement from DHCD. So we actually were able to start in June, July, a little bit earlier because we were not waiting for advanced funds. So everything that we spend is actuals. Other challenges that I think we face is just, it took a little minute to get the contracts in place and stuff like that. And we were able to start before we had our final agreement. And then just clients understanding the term COVID impact. I've had a lot of clients who think I didn't have COVID, so I'm not impacted. So going in the depth with them on that understanding has been needed. And I think just all around, everyone has had impatient landlords, which are understanding, and also getting the information from landlords to fill out the application. They've been a little slow. But all together in Calvert, I mean, it's operating. We've spent more money with ERAP than we did with CDBG in an equivalent amount of time. So this program is moving for us quickly.
All right, Jacqueline, thank you very much. Now, who'd you say was here for St. Mary's?
Dennis Nicholson should be on.
Dennis, are you on? Well, you should be, Dennis. Maya tells me you should be. Okay, well, assuming they're not on now, Michael Young, are you on?
Mr. Hoyer, this is Dennis Nicholson.
Hey, oh, you are on, Dennis. Okay.
Just have to unmute sometimes.
I'd have to do that all the time.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you. Following up on advocacy on Friday afternoons, our team staff from the Department of Social Services, the Housing Authority, and Three Oaks Center were checking in with filings on Friday afternoons, and then following up with those landlords to try to prevent the eviction. And then on Tuesday, we have another court advocate where both district court judges are very supportive and looking for how to work out the eviction problem prior to getting into court action.
Good. I think that's the best way to do it.
The biggest challenge is time to work with folks from the point of getting an application to a payment request can be 30 to 45 days. So it's the processing on our end to get to that application payment. To get a payment out here at the maximum, it takes us 2 days to get a payment. We're able, because of our scale, our collaborative control, we have the money, we can pay that day. It's not paying, it's working through the details to satisfy the Treasury compliance requirements so that we can make the payment.
You're talking about the federal Treasury.
Yes, the federal. We're trying to streamline them and do as much self-certification as we can. I would like to be able to cut down on that 30 to 45 day period.
Dennis, let me reiterate, if you will get to Jazz Lewis, I know Stuart, he's Delegate Lewis. I'm very respectful to him, but he's also a very, very competent, able, high-level staffer in my office, and he's in charge of making sure this program works smoothly from our perspective, and if we need to do something legislatively. So if you would get ideas of how to do this, streamline this process, make the payment faster, encourage landlords to participate. AX said it. I mean, it's a win-win. I can't imagine if I'm a landlord and I've got a tenant who can't pay their bill. Now, if they're destroying the property or they're doing drugs out of the property, you can evict them. But if they're just falling on hard times, their spouse lost a job, they lost a job, they can't afford daycare, whatever it is, they have to pay daycare so they can work, and they therefore can't pay their rent because daycare is so expensive. I just don't understand why landlords really don't hop on this bandwagon, because there's a lot of money and they can be made whole. So,
Leader Hoyer, I just wanted to quickly point out that DHCD doesn't add any additional requirements for eligibility. And I have said to the folks at the Treasury directly that they need to make a very clear determination on being able to accept self-certification for income. And so far they haven't, but I think that would definitely help go a long way.
And you make the self-certification under, I suppose, some sort of perjury, that we affirm under oath that this is,
Right.
is true and correct to the best of our knowledge. And it needs to be to the best of their knowledge, because you got people who are not sure what the question is and may answer incorrectly. So you don't want to hold them criminally liable for something they made a mistake on. But it seems to me we can do this a lot faster if we accept the fact they're going to be 5 to 10% fraud that and we may catch and we may, prosecute, but you're not going to have a program of this magnitude with this, that's going to be perfect. We just have to accept that. There's going to be certain losses. Okay, anybody else? Dennis, had you finished?
Yes, there's more time for all this, but this has been very helpful.
Okay.
Mr. Hoyer, I think Michael Young, we have time for one more update.
Oh, yeah, I recognize Michael. Michael?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I represent Southern Maryland Tri-County Community Action Committee. We're a community action agency serving St. Mary's, Charles, and Calvert County.
Michael? Michael?
Yes.
Me too. Me too.
Okay.
I represent Tri-County. Go ahead. I'm just kidding.
Well, your point about addressing this landlord issue is music to my ears, because this is not something that Stuart and some of the other leaders that we share feedback that we've gotten from landlords. So the current situation is now, if the tenant moves out of that unit, the only way that you can pay the arrears to the old landlord is if there's a contingency with the accepting or receiving landlord. If they say, if the arrears are paid from the old landlord, then we can move forward with your lease for the new landlord situation. So that's unfortunate, because those are our partners. Those landlords are our partners. They serve the community, and they serve a population that is our target population. So without them, we're in trouble, because affordable housing is limited in our areas. So I think a fix would be to address the restriction on that issue. And because the arrears is going to be tied to that customer no matter where they go. Once they leave that old apartment, they go to another apartment, that's going to follow on their credit report. So I think in the best interest of the customer and the best interest of the federal, local, and state government, I think we need to work together on that fix of that part of the regulations. And the other thing is, you don't hear a lot about Airbnb, because a lot of folks who jump ship are now living in Airbnb units, and they're going from one Airbnb to another. So the grant doesn't allow for us to work with those customers. And I know, because I'm a private landlord, I do Airbnb and also own property. So I'm speaking from.
Why does the program not allow us to treat you as a landlord and tenant, even if the tenant is a 2-week tenant or a month tenant, month to month or something? Why does the program prohibit us dealing with that money as you are a landlord and a tenant who vacated or jumped ship on you?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, because
I presume the problem, Michael, is finding the tenant and finding that the tenant may have been eligible under the program for the time in which they lived in your premises.
Right.
Yeah, it's got to be a pretty complicated process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the timeline to process for our agency is about 2 weeks. If we get all their documentation, and sometimes a landlord is the slowest component to get the information, we can process an application in about 2 weeks. We cut checks every week. So we got about $2.4 million total between Charles and Calvert County. We spent roughly around 11-12% of that.
So far. So you have 90% left about, correct? Yes. Okay. And that's a frustration for the Congress, because we put this money out on the street a long time ago, relatively speaking. And we have a crisis of the possibility of large scale evictions. And so members are concerned about that. And it's another reason why I think the members are going to be reluctant to reauthorize or to pass additional legislation continuing a moratorium.
Well, to Stuart's point about capacity, I mean, that was a circular issue with all of us because although we did rental assistance before the pandemic, but it was on a much smaller scale, nothing like this. And we put maybe 5 positions in the grants and we're still interviewing. We're having a problem trying to find people to accept the positions. And we're not the only employer that's having the same story, same challenge.
Right.
So we are aggressively looking to fill the position so we can get those applications moving.
Yeah, I would underscore that this is the largest amount of rental assistance that Congress has ever appropriated. And it does take time. And I think the fact that we are up and running at this point is a testament to the great work of all the local jurisdictions. Because, I mean, there was zero infrastructure in place.
Right, yeah.
And to Michael's point, there are definitely some tweaks to the law that would be helpful. And you know, the Airbnb question and the tenant leaving, that's statute according to Treasury. And so our hands are tied, but you know, we would be open to looking at supporting fixes like that.
Okay, Stuart, and we're going to have to end now. And I apologize, Michael. I don't know whether you had finished your. Did you?
Well,
anything else you wanted to say, Michael?
No, I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank all of you. As I said at some point in time, you know, we passed a law. We beat our chests. We say we did, you know, $46.5 billion. And then we think we've solved the problem. Well, we all know is not true at all. And it then devolves to the state and even more particular than that, the local jurisdictions, whether that's a township, municipality, city, county, whatever the operative local jurisdiction is, to administratively get that money and achieve the objectives that the money was appropriated for. And then you are subject, of course, saying, oh, well, you allowed fraud to happen or something. You made a mistake or this, that, and the other. So, you know, that's why I said we just need to be willing to accept the fact you're going to do this much money in this limited time and solve a problem for 90% of the people. Human beings are human beings, and somebody's going to try to get the money that doesn't deserve it. We know that. But if you would get, Jazz, you ought to be if you would get to Jazz Lewis, not to Delegate Lewis, because he's doing this in his capacity as a member of my staff. But the good news is he's also a delegate. He's also chairman of the Democratic caucus, so he has a lot of influence at the state level. So we can coordinate through Jazz state and local, state and federal attention to this as well as local. So if you will get, I don't want you to spend a lot of time writing an essay. I don't mean that because you're busy with what you're doing. But including Amber, who's an NGO, if you could get suggestions to Jazz, and maybe Stuart, go through you. You have a weekly, you said a weekly conference. You know, maybe we could do it through you, Stuart, and get some counsel to us. And I will sit down with Maxine Waters and Janet Yellen and see what we can do to get this program acting as efficiently and effectively, not only for tenants and landlords, but for those of you who have to administer the program. Okay?
Yep. It's monthly, but we're always happy to hear from them anytime. We do have weekly calls with each of the, you know, jurisdictions. So, but the group meets monthly.
Monthly, okay. Well, whenever you get it, but sooner the better, because at the longest, in my view, is going to be October 3rd. And then we're going to have to pass legislation. And members really believe they've done a lot and they put a lot of money on the table. And they believe that landlords deserve some consideration in terms of being able to get the value of their property. You know, the Constitution says we can't take property without due process. And essentially the moratoria does that for a period of time. So thank you all very much for what you do, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you, and hopefully we can make this work better for all of you, as well as tenants and landlords. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.